I think we can go ahead and kind of get started. If you're just joining us, you can fill out the poll. I'll keep it open for a few more minutes, but we can get started with some introductions. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to start with introductions, talk about ADHD and trends, transition concerns, common accommodations, and then ideas for successful transition. That will take approximately like 30-ish minutes or so, and then we'll move into some Q&A time. If you have questions while we are presenting, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. We will answer them at the end of the session, but please feel free to put the questions in as they come up and as they are in your mind. So starting with introductions, because I'm already talking, I will go first. My name is Emerson Betcher. I'm an outreach specialist with Go Wisconsin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Ives. I use he, him as pronouns. I'm the director of the Access Center at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse.
Hello, I'm Debbie Reuter. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the director for the Center for Students with Disabilities at UW-Whitewater.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to turn my camera off, let our more than prepared and knowledgeable guest speakers to guide you through the rest of this presentation. But thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks, Emerson. One of the things that I think before we start off, I need to let you all know is that throughout the universities of Wisconsin, we each have an Andrew or a Debbie, a coordinator for services for students with disabilities. We have all very different names, right? The Access Center, we have the Center for Students with Disabilities, Disability Resource Center, Accessibility Services. Regardless, we all have that. And Go Wisconsin has a great list of who to contact if you are curious about a different university's services and what we offer. One of the great things too is every month we come together to sort of discuss how we can best serve students with disabilities. And then we also create an annual report where we report on the numbers of students that are registered with each of our offices. And so here you can see really almost 10-year trend from 2015 to 2016, where we had 2015, 2016, we had around 8,000 students to our last year of reported data, which is 15,638 students. So we have almost really doubled the amount of students with disabilities registered with our offices sort of moving forward. So we know that that is an increase over the past 10 years. Emerson, if you could go to the next slide. So for this year, really what we know, the trends that we've been seeing are really increases in students with psychological disabilities. So that's really the largest number of students that we serve. So that's 37.15%. But today we're talking about ADHD and ADD. Depending on when a student was diagnosed, you might have one of those diagnoses there. But again, around 22.15% of students within the universities of Wisconsin that are registered with a disability resource office of some sort state that their primary disability is ADHD. Now, one of the caveats with this number is that we might have a student who has a different disability, say it's a learning disability that they really are identifying as their primary disability, but they also have ADHD as a secondary disability too. So the number of students with ADHD might not be totally, or I would say is not totally reflected within this number. And we definitely have more students, but that might not be a primary academic concern for them. This next slide sort of really shows that same 10-year trend, but we're looking at our top four really disabilities that we serve. And you can see the red line with kind of the diamond-shaped squares shows the increase of students with ADHD that are registering with our office. And I think we'll note some interesting trends. I mean, I think many of us will hear different reasons as to why we start seeing a much larger increase at 2020 in the sort of trend of ADHD diagnoses, but also just those registering with our office. Between 2015 and 2020, that number stayed relatively consistent, but we really saw a sort of higher rate or higher increase in 2020. And similar trend with psychological disabilities as well. I think I'm going to pass it off to Debbie next.
Okay. So we thought we'd touch on a little bit of the transition concerns particular to students with ADHD from high school to college. One of the things that we've really been noticing, and I'm sure you're all also noticing in high school, particularly after the pandemic, is deadlines got a lot looser. And not every student is used to having a deadline for their classes. So that can be a little challenging for the students coming to college because university faculty still have deadlines most of the time. And so it can sort of throw the students off when they have not been in the habit of turning things in on a regular basis or following those deadlines for things. And of course, with a lot of the material that they're learning once they get to college, maybe that information, and also in high school, the information builds on itself. So it's important that they turn those things in and get used to having some deadlines. So for the folks at high school working with students and providing the accommodations at that level, not forgetting that if the student is going to go away to a university or to your college, that they do need to be used to having some deadlines, and that it's really just a lot more frustrating to the student once they get away. So note taking has been another thing that we've noticed with students, that maybe they haven't learned some of those skills, or they struggle with their note taking. We do offer softwares, and I think probably also in the high schools, they offer a lot of different softwares now for note-taking assistance. We as a university have contracted with Glean, and all of the schools offer students that as a electronic note-taking software. It used to be that we provided pure note-taking. That just really isn't very feasible anymore for most students. So I think people are liking the note-taking, but it's also a skill that students should be practicing before they go away. Also, just a daily structure. We're going to talk a little bit about that in the next slide. But of course, students with ADHD may struggle with this skill a little bit more than some others. Students or some other disabilities of just that executive functioning and learning how to structure their day and structure their study time. So those are also really good skills to start practicing. I just presented to faculty at our Rock campus, and we did discuss reading and just the attention span that they're finding students are struggling with long reading passages. And that may be true for a lot of different reasons that probably some of you who are on here as school psychologists could help us understand a little bit better. But just getting them in the habit of reading, and sometimes we, and Andrew will talk about accommodations, but maybe that's listening to books on tape will be also helpful for them to pay attention. Scheduling can be a concern. Medication management, that's another one that we really discuss a lot with families and students when they're going away to school. How are they going to manage the medicine? And also for some students with ADHD, maybe they stop taking their medicine that helps them with ADHD back in junior high, and they decided they didn't really need it anymore. But going away to college when the workload is different and some of the other distractions are different, it may be a good time to have those discussions with their healthcare provider about, is it a good time to start taking medication on a limited basis or reintroducing it? And then what are they going to do when they get away at school? How are they going to remember to take it? Where are they going to store it? All those kinds of things. And then again, like life skills and self-care for all students, it's just a big adjustment for everybody when they go away to college. So practicing laundry, self-care, sleep hygiene, eating hygiene, all of those things are big transition concerns we like to address with students and families before they head off to college. Emerson, I think you can go ahead to the next one. So again, I think probably many of you have already had these discussions also with students and know how the schedule is vastly different when students get from high school to college. So we like this kind of visual that, in school, high school, students have their schedule planned out. Although I don't know how it is in Wisconsin. I came from a school in Illinois, and I know there are more and more schools who are experimenting with hybrid classes and block schedules and things like that, where maybe students are having more free time. And maybe it does look a little bit more like this college schedule for some students. But for the most part, I think primarily a high school schedule is still pretty strictly morning to the afternoon, all day long. And then in college, they have a lot of other gaps in their schedule, free time, and that can open up a door for a distraction of not getting to classes then maybe later in the day, or not making it into classes in the morning, or finding it difficult to get things done in between classes. So talking to students a little bit more about how will that look? How will they fill that day? That's going to look a lot different than high school. So I think that's about it.
Yeah,
And
I would say
you're going to go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say the other thing I would add on there too, when Debbie and I were talking about this presentation, we are also talking like many of the students, at least that I've worked with, that one of their transition issues is going from being a high school student athlete to no longer being a sort of like in structured athletics of some sort. And that again, additionally adds not only is the structure included in classroom, but it also might be included in extracurricular activities that have more regular meeting times. As well as like, again, like I know one of my biggest struggles of transitioning to college was not having my parents being able to help provide how to when to take my medication or when to go to bed, all of these sort of things that were a struggle for many students going forward, but I think are even more difficult for folks with ADHD as well. All
For
right, we can
sure.
go to the next slide too. So one of the things that I think another difficult part of the transition is transitioning from what are common accommodations in the K through 12 setting to the common accommodations in college. And so we'll go a little bit about kind of what are common accommodations throughout the universities of Wisconsin. Now, again, know that these could vary across institution. And what is really true is that each of us will do a kind of individualized assessment of the barriers that the student is experiencing to help us define or figure out what accommodations are best. So we know that not everybody is going to experience ADHD the same. Not everyone is going to have or need the same accommodations to help alleviate any barriers that they're experiencing in academics. So I would say by and far across our universities, testing is our number one accommodation. For students with ADHD, that really is the need for an ADHD or a reduced distraction environment. But I can also share, I know we've worked with many students with ADHD that sometimes cause the distraction in an environment. And so an accommodation is ensuring that they are not distracting other people in their testing environment as well. There might be also some extended time to take tests if that is needed, just because of the ease of distraction and need for a little bit of extra time. I think most of the time we start students at like a time and a half accommodation for that if they're looking for any extended time. Debbie talked a little bit about note-taking accommodations. One of the things that we really don't do is have faculty provide notes for students or outlines of notes for students. And so that oftentimes is a transition or accommodation transition issue too, that a student might expect to be able to be provided notes or have an outline of those notes from faculty. And that's where we, again, allow oftentimes recording of notes, but also trying to connect students with some note-taking strategies that might be helpful as well. Many of our universities use a software called Kurzweil, which is a text-to-speech software. And that allows us to digitize textbooks so that students can have their textbooks read along to them. For, again, many students with ADHD, having that auditory stimulation is helpful in reducing distractions oftentimes. So what I know I have some students that will read the textbook along with the audio to really provide a more sort of sensory stimulant in being able to do their work there and keeping up with readings. The other thing I would say with readings too is students are oftentimes surprised with the the change in the amount of reading that is expected and the amount of comprehension that's expected to of what will be provided. Many of our universities have a flexibility accommodation for flexibility for attendance and flexibility for due dates. When we were talking about this presentation, we decided to put a question mark there because oftentimes we will have students with ADHD that will request that as an accommodation. And many of us and our disability services advisors will have really intentional conversations with students about the intent of that accommodation and whether or not it will be truly helpful for a student. For example, if a student struggles with due dates pretty consistently and chronically, this is probably not an accommodation we would recommend. Partly because the flexible due date accommodation is really meant for students that have really chronic disabilities that might flare up that prevent them from turning in an assignment on a day that it comes. An example that I oftentimes use is say like Crohn's disease, which really, can oftentimes flare up, be really debilitating and prevent someone from being able to turn that in. And then after that flare up, they might need that additional extension to complete it. Oftentimes with our students with ADHD, it might be a time management concern. They didn't start the assignment soon enough and they just need that additional flexibility. And that's typically not helpful for the student or for the faculty as well. And so that's a big question mark. For some students, they might have ADHD and another disability too that like couples with that. And so we want to be sure to be open to that. So we won't say, oh, you have ADHD, you don't get this accommodation, but we're really going to be assessing that on an individualized basis. Students with ADHD will oftentimes also ask for housing accommodations. And so our disability services offices across the universities of Wisconsin help to coordinate that process. Most of us, I think most or not all of us do help to coordinate that process. And so again, a student with ADHD may have a barrier within their housing situation. Oftentimes we'll get asked for a sort of reduced distraction environment for studying and maybe a request for a single room. That is not a typical accommodation that we would approve. We would really actually try to look for what are some other distraction-free study environments that the student can connect with outside of the residence halls as well. As I was mentioning throughout this too, many of our students with ADHD have other disabilities that may impact their accommodations or their eligibility for accommodations. And so evaluations are super helpful. Up-to-date evaluations are also really helpful. So we have students with ADHD that might have earlier in life diagnoses. And we know that their experience, the academic barriers they might be having may have changed as they have as they've progressed through their schooling. And so updated evaluations can be really helpful, not only for the student to reassess what their needs might be, but also for us to assess that as well. The other thing I'm going to mention here too, oftentimes we have students that may have had accommodations throughout their K through 12 experience, and they want to come in and try college without accommodations. And for some students that works, but also there are other students who the recommendation that I would typically give is that let's get those accommodations set up. Let's talk about again how they are going to be very different from your K through 12 experience. And that like you having these available and ready for when you need them will be much easier than like middle of the semester trying to get accommodations set up. And actually maybe starting off with accommodations and then trying them without in the college setting. I would recommend more so than anything else taking that first test in a reduced distraction environment. If you've been taking tests in reduced distraction environment throughout K through 12 is better than realizing that you needed it and failing your first test. Because within the university settings, very rarely are you going to be able to retake a test because you didn't have the accommodations here. All of our accommodations are not retroactive. So we won't say you now are eligible for this. So let's make sure you get all of these accommodations for the tests you took a month ago. Really, we're saying you get your accommodations moving forward from when we determine that eligibility. And so the earlier, the better in getting connected with our offices. Okay, we'll move to the next
Yeah,
slide.
I think before we totally move on from that topic, I would say also, it's always a good idea for students to get connected with our offices because all of our offices have coordinators who are there to help students. And if they get connected early on, those folks will do some outreach and we do case management to some degree. You know, we meet with students regularly. So if it's a student that we suspect might get a little bit lost in the process and find themselves maybe a little behind halfway through the semester, if we have some relationship and we've met with them up front, we can, you know, be more proactive about reaching out to them and calling them in to see if there's any support they need. Many universities have like early alert systems where if students aren't going to campus or classes or falling behind, we can also be another piece of that puzzle to help engage with the student and intervene sooner rather than later. So, and then also, but I was presenting this morning to some faculty on our other campus who were talking about Kurzweil, and they were telling me about an app. One of the faculty members who had ADHD was telling everybody about an app that they use that also takes content and takes it from text to speech. So I feel like students now have a lot more options available to them and some more fun tools to help them stay organized and do some of these accommodations on their own as well. So that's kind of nice to learn. So some of the ideas for successful transition, again, I think we talked a little bit about the due dates, practicing having some due dates. If your schools have gotten out of the habit of having very hard due dates with students, I think helping students or families practice that concept of making sure things are due at a certain time and having some penalty for that because students need to be motivated to complete their assignments on time or else they're going to find themselves pretty much falling behind, and that's not going to be good. Also, the practicing note taking. We talked a little bit about the exercise piece. I think that is something that we all always see as well, right? So students who have ADHD were very involved in athletics, theater, music, whatever it is. Then they get away to school and they don't have any outlet for that energy. So talking to students about how are they going to replace that outlet for themselves and how are they going to build that into their schedules. And balancing schedules as well is another big piece. So even though it looks like there's a lot of gaps in between college schedule, maybe if it's a student who does struggle with a lot of heavy reading text, they should be thinking about not their first semester not having too many classes where the reading is going to be overwhelming to them, or they're not going to be able to keep up with the reading, or some other things, making sure they work with the disability office and whoever their coordinator is to kind of look at those schedules before they start their semester and have some of those conversations with them as well. One of the things we've tried out in the last year and has been really popular is group studying. And I'm new to this concept. I learned about it from some of my staff of body doubling. I don't know, maybe some of you have heard of that. And really, we just have a group that meets, an ADHD Spaces group, it's called, and they meet on a weekly basis. Sometimes in the beginning, they do a little, the coordinators do a little bit of like psychoeducational information, but for the most part, it's just a group of students coming together to do their work, keeps them accountable, holds a space for them, not a lot unlike a study hall. So for students to look for ways, so they may be looking for a quiet, distraction-free environment, but maybe that means they also are better off working with another group of students who are quietly working. So helping them find those spaces, whether that's in a formal group or going to the library during the day to study, finding an exercise outlet in between the day for them to get some of that other energy out, and help them stay on track. What else do we talk about? Looking for support on campus. So again, whether that's at a tutoring center, our offices who can help direct them to those kinds of supports on campus. There's just a lot that campuses offer, and it can be super overwhelming to students, right? So even we have a specialized tutoring program where students come in and get additional support for executive functioning. When I started, there were a lot of different people involved helping the students. So what we heard back from them was like, I'm having trouble organizing just the help I'm needing. So that can be difficult. And that's another place where calendars and task trackers, learning how to use Canvas. I think there are a lot of ways to stay organized within the whole classroom management systems that students have available to them that can help them stay on track. And so getting the students used to using those, and a lot of times they are, and a lot of times our students come in with all of those skills and it's great, but if they lose track of those skills, when they get there, just reminding them about them. And I think we also talked a little bit more about medication and evaluating if they stopped using medication, is now a good time to maybe consider it. Even if it's just minimally during class work time or whatever it is, it's just a good idea maybe to have that conversation while they're at home, and even test that out over the summers before they leave, or maybe their senior year, see if it's helpful to them. So anything else, Andrew, you can think of here? I think we're getting close to question and answer time. So I just included, which also, probably you are familiar with some of these things as well, organizations that helps have resources for students with ADHD. And I thought that this magazine article, this college survival guide, was pretty interesting. So that would be maybe another resource for people to consider looking at, and just whatever it is, look for those ideas now, those executive functioning kind of tools that are out there, and help students get ready.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, you guys, or both of you. We will now open it up for question and answer. So feel free again to put questions in the chat. And then I think Debbie and Andrew, you can also see the Q&A, or is that just, okay, great. Sounds good.
Yeah, I see the first one is asking about IEP 504 accommodation for college to get accommodations or just a diagnosis. And so I would think we'd probably say all of the above to that. So I think probably at all of the state institutions, any public institution, if you have a recent 504 plan, updated IEP, or a history of IEP that a student can bring in, that is very helpful to us to help know what the barriers are and what the accommodations are that will be helpful. If the situation is, there isn't one of those and there's a recent neuropsych evaluation, or letters or forms. All of us probably also have forms on our websites that you can fill out with the help of a physician or a psychologist or a psychiatrist, that maybe if it's something newer that's come up for a student, that we can get medical professionals to sign off and say, these are some of the functional limitations the student would experience if they didn't have them. And then, of course, we also see students who were never diagnosed. And I think that's part of the rise in the ADHD, is that we've seen more and more students realizing, hey, this maybe something's going on, and they're getting more recent diagnoses. with ADHD, and that's why it is an interactive process, and we meet with students and have those conversations, because maybe there are some limited accommodations we can provide up front while a student's going through some testing, while they're working with their medical provider, and we can do some interim accommodations. So
I think the only thing I'd add on that question too is this is an important time where oftentimes our universities can be different in what they accept or don't. And the standards might vary. And so I would suggest any student, or if you're supporting a student, to reach out to that university about what the requirements could be. And the other thing I would say too with IEP or 504 plans, they do vary across also the institution they're coming from as well. And so the type of information oftentimes is what we're looking at to help us assess what accommodations there are. And so if you have questions or the student has questions, reaching out to whatever university, their disability services offices we definitely will be able to help answer or clarify what requirements it would be for that university too.
Great, thank you. I'll leave about 30 more seconds or so just in case there are any more questions that people are finishing typing up in the Q&A box. So if you are interested in asking a question, please feel free to type that in that Q&A box. You should see it on the bottom of your screen. But I just want to leave some time and space in case anyone is still typing. So give about 15 more seconds for folks to finish those up. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for that question to the person that asked it. And thank you to our presenters as well. This is the Go Wisconsin contact information. So if you are interested in following up or have further questions, feel free to reach out to our office. We're open between 8 to 4:30, Monday through Friday. We've gone through a rebrand. So if you search UW Help, you will find us, but we are now the Go Wisconsin team. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today, and stay warm. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
thank you.